Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Encounter 284. My name is Jono Logan, and happy holidays. This is technically going to be our holiday episode, as the Monday 2 weeks from now is Christmas morning. So the episode 2 weeks from now will be going up the next day. So in Canada, that would be Boxing Day. Americans don't celebrate Boxing Day, which is weird to me because it seems like such a great idea. Anyway, so Merry Christmas to everyone out there who celebrates. It was a big week in games. It was a real big week in games. So we have a lot to talk about. I just want to introduce this week's panel and we can get talking. So Abe is here, fresh from Japan, as a matter of fact.
Ohio gozaimasu. Although I'm not still in Japan. I'm actually back in the States now. But
I still appreciate that little burst of enthusiasm there. That was that good. And Izzy is with us today.
Hello.
All right. So we have the Game Awards 2023. They were this week. I enjoyed it. It was a big show. There was some controversy involved in it for a variety of reasons. But I thought it was pretty much what it's sort of just winter E3 at this point, with the veneer of awards put in front of it. Some people had a pretty big issue. I think that the Game Awards got spooked last year by like the 8-minute and 30-second speech for best performance. So they really cut the speeches short this year to about 30 seconds before the music started playing off the winners. And they also combined a lot of awards into like rapid fire ones. And some of those awards were fairly, technically big categories. It was weird. But what wasn't weird were the really great assortment of announcements that were involved. But first, let's take a look at some of the big award winners. It was Baldur Gate's 3 big night. They weren't quite the Titanic of the Game Awards because they didn't win everything, but they did win a lot. They won Best Game, Best RPG, Best Community Support, Best Multiplayer, Player Voice, and Best Performance. Sea of Stars won Best Indie, which made me happy as both a fan of RPGs and a Canadian. Cyberpunk 2077 won Best Ongoing Game, which is weird for so many reasons. I don't understand. No one understands, and no one's even angry about it. People just seem to be like, what? That seems strange. So I guess that a game being in development continuously after it's released because it was broken is considered to be ongoing. But there were also a lot of really, really cool announcements and trailers. So one of the biggest ones was that Square Enix revealed 2 waves of DLC for Final Fantasy XVI. They announced The Echoes of the Fallen and The Rising Tide. The big news, though, was that they actually shadow dropped Echoes of the Fallen that night. So right now, Zach is currently hard at work on a review for it. Have either of you played Final Fantasy XVI? And if you did, are you excited for the DLC?
So I did play Final Fantasy 16 on release, played it in just like a couple days, powered through it. I enjoyed my time with it overall, but I had quite a lot of complaints with it, and it probably is the Final Fantasy game I'm least likely to replay, so I'm not even sure if I'm interested in that DLC because it doesn't look like it changes enough about the game to really pull me in, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm about halfway through Final Fantasy 16. I suppose I should finish it. Well, yeah, I don't know. I might be interested in checking out a DLC if I ever get there.
Yeah, I sincerely doubt that I'm going to be playing Final Fantasy 16. Certainly not in 2023 because there's only 21 days left in that month, that year. And I feel like at some point in the future, we should have a random encounter special, which just talks about Final Fantasy and what Final Fantasy has become versus what it was. Because I feel like Final Fantasy, there are fans and they are loving Final Fantasy 16. Zach adored it. There are a lot of people who really, really adored it, but there are another subsection of fans that have sort of fallen off with Final Fantasy over the last, I'd say, decade or so, as it's just become a very different game series from what it was initially. And I think an interesting episode would be not an argument, not a debate, but a discussion about what Final Fantasy is now versus what it was then, and does it have the same relevance in today's RPG gaming landscape as it did, let's say, around the era of like Final Fantasy X.
Well, it's almost been a decade since Final Fantasy 15 came out, so
okay, that's a good point. Yes, that's a good point.
I guess, but 14's been updated, and that's been pretty good from what I understand. So,
and we've got Final Fantasy VII Remake as well.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. I think this is an interesting discussion. I'll think about that. Anyway, in other news, Solosi was screaming because Monster Hunter Wilds got announced. It's coming in 2025. We got a trailer. It's obviously a ways in the future. We didn't get much information about it. Just, some desert and running on a bird and lots of stuff like that. But it looks really, really cool. We'll be seeing more about that over the next year and change. Visions of Mana was revealed by Square Enix. So this is going to be the first entry of the Mana series, not including the free-to-play Echoes of Mana on mobile that got released a few years ago, which frankly doesn't count. It's the first new entry since Adventures of Mana in 2016. Now, we have gotten a remake of Trials of Mana a few years ago, so that is probably a clue about where they're going to be taking Visions. It was pretty successful, so I imagine that Visions is going to be using that as inspiration. I still haven't played Trials yet, but I am actually quite excited that it seems like Square Enix is returning to the Mana series because it's, one of their longest running series. It's their action RPG staple. And I think that I would like to see them do some interesting stuff with it. I hope this game does some new things.
Square Enix is such a weird company. Like, so much weird stuff they put out, but they also support some of their old series in a way that no other company really does. So it's like it's a catch-22 where sometimes you'll get Valkyrie Elysium, which a lot of fans of Valkyrie Profile are not big on. Des at least liked it, but then you'll also get something like this where a series that's seemed dead forever comes back and gets a reasonably budgeted looking game that looks cool.
Oh, well, I'm interested to see if they find a way to make it feel like a classic Mana game in terms of the gameplay, just because there's a lot of hack and slash games now, even from Square Enix, but like the new Star Ocean game, I really enjoyed the gameplay of that, so, and that was, I could see it being kind of similar to that, so I don't know, I'm just interested to see if they can do anything to make it feel like that, harken back to Secret of Mana.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as Izzy. I don't even know, to be honest, I don't even know what Square Enix is anymore. I don't think that they know what they are anymore. We keep joking that technically our big coverage, like the game we cover the most next year because it's from Square Enix, should be Foam Stars. We're not, unfortunately, because Mike has no vision as the head of the site. We should just become Foam Star fan. But yeah, I feel like Square Enix really needs to figure some stuff out. And hopefully they will. Hopefully something like Visions of Mana is a big hit, because if, you vote with your wallet, and if things are a hit, if they make money, then more if it comes our way. Speaking of big hits, Mass Effect has been a big hit. It's a beloved thing. And some of the veterans at BioWare have announced a different studio, and they've announced a new space RPG called Exodus. For lack of a better word, it looks like a Mass Effect light. With a dash of the plot of Pixar's Lightyear. There's going to be time dilation as a plot point here. So rather than just making choices and seeing what immediate effect they have, with the time dilation, apparently you can get a chance to see what effects your choices have days, weeks, years, decades into the future, which is a really interesting idea. I feel like that is it's a big... I don't know how they're going to be able to scale that properly and make it a reasonably sized game, but we'll see. It looks good. It looks like Mass Effect.
I'm very curious in that they're trying to bill it as a franchise already, which usually isn't a great idea. But what I'm curious about is the studio's founded by Wizards of the Coast, so they do stuff outside. Like, they're mostly a tabletop game group, right? They make Magic the Gathering, they make Dungeons and Dragons. So I wonder if they can almost force that franchising of it by releasing it with an RPG setting for Dungeons and Dragons, or a set with Magic the Gathering and things like that.
Yeah, they got their beaks wet with Baldur's Gate 3, I think. Even though they just gave the license, it wasn't technically them developing, but I know they're tabletop, but that's a pretty good foundation to build a game studio on.
Looks all right.
That was my opinion too. I was like, this looks fine.
Sorry, I was going for the McConaughey there, but but yeah, I don't know. Anytime games touts former BioWare members, I feel like that's something that gets me excited. So, but yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see when it gets to actual gameplay instead of just cutscenes.
Yeah, that's the case for most of these trailers. Most of these trailers are just cutscenes. One of the things that got me the most excited and caught me the most off guard was an announcement of a sequel to The Case of the Golden Idol, The Rise of the Golden Idol. Case was my stealthy favorite game in recent memory. I think I've mentioned it on this podcast before. It's probably the best unofficial couch co-op game I've played in years, where Amanda and I just sat on the couch together and tried to unravel the mysteries in it. It was so much fun. If you have a partner who is into video games, or even one who isn't, I cannot recommend this game more as a fun way to spend an evening or two. It looks like Rise is going to be, at least based on the trailer, a little bit more active, I guess, whereas Case was almost completely static scenes with just minimal animation. The camera's moving around and stuff. So I have hopes that this is going to be as good as the original. I'm very excited for it. Neither of you have played Golden Idol, have you?
I have not.
Oh God, I so recommend it. Everyone out there who is like, we still don't have a review on the site, so if you like see it on sale at Christmas on a Steam sale and you're like, I'll give that a shot, and you want to write a review for it, I've been like trying to get people to write a review for it. I should write a review for it. I just don't have the time. Anyway, in other news, we have Lost Records, Bloom and Rage, which Caitlin described as a Life is Strange like, and I described as Life is Stranger Things. It kind of looks like a female-led version of Stranger Things from the images. There are some very retro stylings and fashion, and 4 women who look like they're from the 1980s or early 90s, and then it fast forwards and it follows them in modern day. It looks like Life is Strange. It's from many of the same developers of Life is Strange, so it's very interesting. It has a good look. I hope it's pretty good.
It also kind of evokes Stephen King's It as well, with the future, the modern day people and them as kids and something horrible happening kind of thing.
Yes. Oh, the 80s. You have so much to answer for, and you are answering it nonstop. We outside of the announcements, we actually got some interesting performances. We got a live performance of the theme song from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Neat song. Very darkly. There was the performer singing it on stage, and then behind her, there was the character singing it. Was that Aerith singing it? I couldn't tell. Kind of looked like her.
I think so.
I think so as well.
Yeah.
The joke that I made in the chat, which was fairly dark, is I really wanted Sephiroth to just drop down from the rafters with his sword midway through, skewer her, grab the mic out of the air, and then take the second verse on a dramatic key change. That would have been awesome, but it didn't happen.
Meanwhile, I was like, is Game Awards going to make me cry right now?
Aw.
It didn't, but it was still very emotional.
It was a pretty song. No one knows what's going to happen in Rebirth. Are we going to get a moment that is reminiscent of the original? That's another question it's a difficult question to actually talk about, because Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth by extension, and I don't know, Recycle when it comes out in 12 years from now, is, I don't want to say spoiler resistant, but like you can't really talk about it without talking about the original and this one and what Square Enix is doing with the narrative. And it's going to be very interesting to see. It's regardless of what they choose, whether or not they choose to go the canonical route with the fate of a certain character, or they decide to subvert it. One of the two, people are either going to love it or they're going to hate it. And it's going to be a very controversial moment. And we'll probably be talking about it on this podcast, and every podcast will be talking about it.
They knew exactly what they were doing when like setting up people being able to talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake, the trilogy, forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether or not they go the Scott Pilgrim takes off route. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if either of you have seen the show yet or know Scott Pilgrim.
I'm like halfway through it.
I enjoyed it. It was cute. It was fun.
No spoilers out here, but you should watch the first episode if you like Scott Pilgrim. At the very least, watch the first episode if you like Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah.
My personal favorite moment from the entire show, and I think it was the personal favorite moment of many people, was the live performance by Poets of the Fall, aka the Old Gods of Asgard, Herald of Darkness from Alan Wake 2. Now, I love Poets of the Fall. I found them through Remedy Games because of their very long association with Remedy Games that goes back to Max Payne, but more specifically goes back to Alan Wake 1. I just loved their music. I really love their music. And I downloaded all of their albums and really fell in love with them. And the fact that they work so closely with Remedy is something that I love. And the fact that they did this amazing live performance that featured the cast, And Sam Lake in the middle of the group, clearly not a dancer, but having the time of his goddamn life, dancing to this song center stage with this massive grin in his face. It was just delightful. And also, I happen to think it was a pretty damn good song. I really need to play it. It's
me too.
It's not like when I say something's on my backlog, it usually means that it's like way back on my backlog. Alan Wake 2 is right up to the top. I'm waiting to see if it goes on sale, even a little bit of a sale for Christmas. If it doesn't, I'm going to buy it anyway. But if it does, I'll save myself like, I don't know, it'll be a Christmas sale on a new game. So it'll probably be like $5-10, but whatever. I love Remedy's games so much. There's something about them, all of them, even the ones that aren't really super popular, like Quantum Break. I really, really enjoyed Quantum Break. They just speak to me. Something about almost the repertory theater aspect of it, where they keep bringing back actors to play different roles. I just love it. Like, I really love it. And I'm just so excited for Alan Wake, as it's a continuation of Alan Wake and many of the themes that were introduced in Control, apparently. So it's going to everything I've heard just makes me really excited about it. Did either of you have any favorite moments or announcements from the show?
A little bit of a weird one is Sega announcing 5 games at once, which I'm both excited and concerned for, I suppose. They, not very much shown of each game, don't really know what's going to happen with them. Some rumors that Crazy Taxi and Jet Set Radio might be live service games. So it's hard to know how to feel about, but it also still, like, as a Sega kid, made me excited.
Yeah, because there was, I was a Nintendo kid and then a PlayStation kid, but there was something about that era of Sega which just evokes nostalgia, and it seems like they're leaning really heavily into it with these game announcements.
Well, yeah, like I guess I was just really interested in the direction of Golden Axe. It looks a little bit different, and looks like they could add some stuff to it with the new environment, the 3D sort of take, as opposed to the original.
Yeah, the games announced were Jet Set Radio, Shinobi, Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, and Crazy Taxi. So I think that got some people pretty excited. It was pretty excited. I personally, when I saw the trailer, I was like, oh, I wonder if they're going to kill Sonic again. That worked out well last time. Abe, how about you? Is there anything in the show that caught your attention?
Well, I am a Hideo Kojima fan, as frustrating as that can be sometimes.
Yes.
I still need to finish Death Stranding, I'm excited because there's a new Kojima game coming out. The preview didn't exactly give us a lot, but I love Sophia Lillis and Jordan Peele.
I do too.
So, I mean, that's a good, potentially a good sign for something. I have no idea what OD is going to be like at all, but it's coming, I guess.
It is their Microsoft exclusive game too, I believe. So
yeah,
like that second person walking out of the door, I was expecting Phil Spencer, not Jordan Peele.
That would be interesting.
That's not exactly the greatest sign for it, but we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of it, I believe she was in the remake.
Yes,
and it's funny because her career is very short thus far, and it is also really, really good. Like, she's been in some really cool movies. She was great in Dungeons and Dragons. Incidentally, the new Dungeons and Dragons movie is so much fun.
It really is.
It's a really fun movie. Yeah.
I really wish it got a better reception. Like, it got a great reception, but like in terms of the money it took in, because I was like, I could go for a sequel to this. This is such a great, just popcorn flick. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's something that they could definitely, just kind of keep the same actors and just have them play new roles every time.
Do the Critical Role thing where you have different campaigns featuring the same actors playing different parts.
Right. Yeah.
That would be really fun.
that could be interesting.
Also, like Ishin, or how it uses the same actors for the characters.
Yes. I want Like a Dragon to do that with a couple of different genres. I would.
Me too.
My fantasy is that they decide to do that, but do a space opera style game, but using the cast of Yakuza. Just get the people. Exodus. Just make Exodus into a Like a Dragon game, and just like have the character have Majima fighting like alien bugs. That's what I want.
And then do like a classic fantasy where Majima is a elf. A dark elf.
Tremendous casting. Just perfect. Just perfect casting.
I have one more thing for the Game Awards that I wanted to mention.
Please.
So Light No Fire, or Light No Fires, by Hello Games. Interesting showing for me. Because No Man's Sky, we all know, had a weird development history, and when it came out, it was very disappointing for a lot of people because a lot of the promise wasn't there. But they've continuously updated that game for like 10 years. It's in a much, much better shape. So the idea of them compressing down this thing they've done for a whole universe into one big world, so it's just jam-packed with stuff, and then making that fantasy, and you can walk around as like a bunny person, or like there's dragons you can ride. Like there's a lot there that could be cool. I'm not sure if the end result will be something I want to play, but I am very curious about it.
Yeah, No Man's Sky is oh God, I felt, this is related, but there was a part of me, I felt so sorry for Todd Howard and Starfield at this thing, because they zoom in on Todd Howard at one point, and I was like, ooh, they should do a Todd Howard, sad Todd Howard meme. Because Starfield did not do well, obviously. They had a trailer, which we showed up in, actually. Our review showed up in the accolades for Starfield. And I still haven't played Starfield, and I want to. But the fact that it's kind of being received as a poor man's No Man's Sky is not a good sign.
It's going to be the next ongoing game. next ongoing game of the year.
It should be, because when you look at games like, well, it's No Man's Sky, for example, or a much better example for this one, Cyberpunk 2077. Like, they realized with Cyberpunk 2077 that their studio their reputation was based on them fixing this game and making it into a game that was, at the very least, approaching the greatness of Witcher 3. And apparently they did, which is awesome. Bethesda not Bethesda as a studio, like in terms of a publisher, they're doing fine. They're doing great. But in terms of their first party games, they need a hit. They really, really need a hit. And Starfield, they keep trying, but it's just not working. And I feel like working on Starfield for a year or 2 years, push back Elder Scrolls 6, make it into what Starfield should have been, would be time well spent for them. I don't know if it would earn them any money, but they're Bethesda. I expect just vaults of gold underneath their studio, because they keep re-releasing Skyrim. I feel like they should take a shot and work on it and make it into the game that everyone hoped it would be. I don't think they will, but I feel like they should.
It just came out at a tough time. I mean, they followed up on Baldur's Gate 3.
You're not wrong.
That's not really fair for another huge Western RPG that's also been in the works for so many years. They could have delayed it a few months, maybe, and taken over that social media space that Baldur's Gate 3 was occupying at the time.
I don't disagree with you, Abe. To the point where I almost wish they released it sooner and buggier, because the fact that Bethesda games are buggy is sort of it's an ingredient. It's built in. It's baked into the cake. So if they released a buggy game, it would have been, I think most people would have been like, whatever, and they wouldn't have been crowded out by this generation-defying RPG that just made them look, well, old and dated in comparison.
Yeah, literally a month later, I think, right? About a month later. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. And by the way, this is not me slamming Starfield, because genuinely, I love Bethesda games. I love the exploration style of it. I'm genuinely super excited to play this game once I have a graphics card that won't set my computer on fire if I try playing it. Because I could get it for PlayStation 5, but I don't want it for PlayStation 5 because I like playing first-person shooters with a mouse and keyboard.
I don't think you can get it for PlayStation 5.
No, not PlayStation 5. You're right.
The Xbox.
You want to know what? They probably will at some point, though. You're right. They obviously,
yeah, I can see it happening, but
I can see it happening because I think they need it. If this was a massive hit, I don't think it would have ever shown up on a Sony platform. It's not. So I feel like at this point they need it. They might not do it, but it wouldn't hurt.
Though that brings up the other tough thing that they locked it to Xbox and and PC, which locks out a huge portion of the video game fan base because, you know, I don't know how many people own Xboxes, but I know
and
the
then
PS5 is definitely the bigger console right now.
And then at the same time, Baldur's Gate 3 only came to PS5 at first and not Xbox. So
yeah, that too.
Yeah, although it is out for Xbox, which was another. Apparently, they were supposed to announce it at the Game Awards in one of their victory speeches, and they just ran out of time. Great job, Game Awards. I was thinking based on the Game Awards, and I did enjoy it. I kind of wish that there was an indie version of the Game Awards, like just for specifically indie games, because at the moment, indies might be my favorite. Well, they're not a genre, but my favorite style of games. They're usually a bit shorter. There's usually very little padding. They're much leaner. They do more with less. And I feel like a lot of AAA games could learn a lot from them, especially considering rapidly ballooning budgets. That's something that I don't think the game industry is quite ready to face yet. I think the film industry is, though. I think that in the next few years, you're going to see like $25 million Marvel movies. I think they're going to start cutting that down to about $100 million and just start doing more with less. Might be wrong about that, but it would probably be good for them. Speaking of indies, we're going to be talking about 2 indie RPGs today, both of which involve queer themes and queer characters. So let's get into this. So Abe, the first one we want to talk about is a game that you reviewed for the site a few days ago called Little Goody Two Shoes. And you loved it. You really loved it. You gave it 95. And this is one of those games which I did not hear about. I heard nothing about until I read your review. And then I was like, oh crap, this looks good. So it's technically on paper, Little Goody Two Shoes is a narrative horror RPG from Astral Shift. It's technically a prequel to their 2016 horror game Pocket Mirror. But honestly, calling it a narrative RPG would be a little reductive, as it also has it's part life sim, part dating sim, part survival horror, part roguelike, part arcade style mini game thing. It does a lot of things, and apparently it does like most of them really, really well. And though it was developed in Unity, very clearly it was inspired by RPG Maker style horror games many years ago. But then it takes that and it seems to push it in a less horror direction. So Abe, you loved it. Tell us a little bit about Little Goody Two Shoes. It's a very, very fairy tale like game from what I've read and seen.
I wouldn't say it was necessarily less of a horror direction. I'd say that it kind of does a good job of hiding the horror portion behind a veneer of Disney and Sailor Moon sort of aesthetic.
Okay, so in the horror, I feel like the horror, at least from what you've described here, goes in the more of the dark fairy tale sense than the probably the most famous RPG Maker horror game, Corpse Party.
Sort of. It gets pretty dark.
It gets dark. Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't downplay that too much.
Are there any corpse parties in this game?
I haven't played Corpse Party, so I'm not sure. But it gets pretty dark, especially some of the quote bad endings. But yeah. And you mentioned that it does a lot of things. And I think the amazing thing is that it is able to smooth them all together into really a pretty coherent experience. Without feeling too jarring or weird. Well, weird in one sense, but not in terms of gameplay.
Yeah, looking at the screenshots of this game is a trip because it goes through. Pardon me. It goes through so many different genres of games. Like you have this happy little town, and it's a life sim, and there are stores, and then you cut over to what looks like a medieval looking handheld console, and then you go into like the nightmare world, and it's such a striking looking game.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's kind of amazing how beautiful they made this kind of RPG Maker inspired style game look. There's so much they do creatively, visually creatively between the SNES style kind of look
Yep. But calling it pixel art, I think, would almost be reductive because there's a very hand-drawn style that's used in it, where it evokes 16-bit RPGs. But clearly, I'd say it evokes more like late era 32-bit RPGs. I mean, the hand-drawn look of the game is, okay, frankly, it's freaking beautiful. But I do want to ask, how does that impact the story and the overall experience? I guess my question is, does it look like it plays, or?
Well, the gameplay is like mostly in service of the narrative. Like, there's definitely kind of a, like you said, it's mainly a life sim, I guess. But there's so many different things that you do in the game that's hard to really, that's pretty reductive to just hammer it into like one genre.
It really does seem like that kind of game where there's so many genres in play here.
So, like, I mean, the main, I guess, gameplay would be that. Well, okay, so this is like I said, it's a horror game. You have to keep the character alive. That's really the main gameplay. And there's multiple threats to keeping Elise, this young woman who's the main character, alive. So it takes place in this small town called Kieferberg, which is very very. There's a lot of German-ish type of influence here. There's a lot of German writing. It's a fairy tale. It's very very Brothers Grimm.
Yeah, I was about to say it looks Brothers Grimm. Yeah, so dark fairy tale rather than Disney fairy tale. Although it does have the trappings of a Disney fairy tale.
Yeah. So one of the main things you have to do is you have to Elise has a hunger meter, and you have to keep her fed. So it's not particularly difficult to do. Like the gameplay is not difficult in this game. If you fail, it's kind of like I failed I got her hunger meter all the way to 0 once on purpose, but otherwise it's not particularly difficult. So
you're playing this like The Sims, really.
And it's
if there was a swimming pool, Elise would be dead right now.
If you're reviewing a game, you gotta see what happens. But yeah, I would say that the gameplay is mainly in service to building the narrative and building the atmosphere. But in order to keep her fed, you have to either find food or purchase it. And the way Elise goes about her daily life is she does odd jobs around town, which is how she makes money. And so you have to do some of these odd jobs, and that's where the arcade portion comes in. They're these really simple little, like, almost flash game style games. They're extremely simple. The presentation of them is really cool, though, and I will, as with a lot of things with this game, I'll leave that for gamers for the players to experience on their own, because it's really cool looking. But it's these simple games like move the character around to catch apples that are falling out of the trees, things like that. But so this is how she makes money, which in turn then she's able to buy food.
But yeah, she's a freelancer, like so many of us are.
Yeah, simple gameplay loop. And then the other main thing is that the people of this town are very very suspicious lot. They're very religiously devout as well, and there are kind of some disturbing things happen around town, and that leads the townspeople to start thinking that there may be a witch that's influencing all these weird things that are happening. And so the townspeople are suspicious of each other, and they're also suspicious of Elise for a number of reasons. And you also have like a suspicion meter that you have to keep down. When you talk to the townspeople, sometimes they'll ask you a question, and depending on how you answer it, your suspicion meter will go up or down. So yeah, that's another thing that you had to juggle with keeping Elise fed.
But all of this is during the daytime, though.
Sort of. So she also has a health meter, a normal health meter, which is mostly affected at nighttime when the really weird things happen. and for the horror portion of the game, I guess.
Because nothing up to this point has sounded particularly scary.
Yeah, but it gets there. It gets there. It actually really kind of throws you into the at least the hint that there's something amiss, like from the beginning of the game. So, with Elise lives out in the woods, like separate from the town, and you had to wander through the woods in order to get to her house, and that's how the game starts. Creepy nighttime, wind blowing, very autumn theme. So yeah, it does a good job of showing you this beautiful like Disney style opening, and then with a musical number even, and then throwing you into this like dark, somewhat spooky world.
Yeah, nothing says fairy tale quite like a deep, dark woods.
Yeah, exactly. And then things progress from there. She meets another girl who is kind of weird. To not spoil anything. Yeah, when we find a young woman living in your shed, like that's 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 gonna set off some alarm bells, I think.
Yeah, it's the standard ET play there.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's why I think it's kind of amazing that it smashes all these seemingly disparate elements together and makes them into a quite coherent experience.
Yeah, the night segments, I guess they're nightmare segments, I'm not quite sure, but they surface level, looking at the screenshots and the gameplay, they resemble a little bit Zelda-like, but rather than the combat, it seems like the focus is more on puzzle solving and running than fighting.
That's right. There is no combat, but yeah, it's mainly kind of exploration, and you do have to do a bit of running. It's a bit of a survival horror game, a little bit. But I really love the puzzles that the developers set up, because they're really just very well integrated into what you're doing at the time. It doesn't, there's not like a screen that says, "Okay, it's puzzle time now," or anything like that.
It's puzzle time.
Yeah. But very, very smoothly integrated into what you're doing at the time. And it just feels like it's part of the story. And the puzzles are pretty good too. And I'm not going to spoil exactly what you do in any of them, because again, it's best experienced fresh, without
part of the joy of the game, really.
Yeah. But I do like that the puzzles are kind of mostly in real time, and it's kind of one of these where you gotta make certain moves at certain times, and then so you have to go through a few times, and die, and then start again and try to remember, okay, I need to go that way instead of this way, and then do like a whole sequence of these things time. So they're fun puzzles.
And I mean, again, the puzzles are only one part of the game. The other part of the game, another part of the game would be it's a dating sim. And this is where some of the queer themes come in, because Elise is, I'm assuming based on what you wrote, that Elise is a lesbian. And there are multiple potential, I guess, partners in the town who you can meet and romance in the traditional, I guess, Harvest Moon style of game, just interacting with them and that sort of thing. But I'm curious how her sexuality is handled within the story, because as you mentioned, there's a suspicion meter. She is under suspension. This is a very religious town. I'm curious, does her sexuality play any part in that? Or is this village a very accepting village of sexuality, just not of anything else?
Well, the interesting thing is that she's not immediately like presented as lesbian necessarily, but your only options for romance are three of the women in town. So, and I don't know if you like understand like some of like we're gonna get into some like academic stuff here, I suppose, but like feminist theory and stuff like that. History of feminism and things like that. When we've had like in the U.S. at least, like when we've had scares about witchcraft and burnings at the stake and all that. It's been largely tied to keeping strong-willed women sort of in their place. So the game doesn't explicitly the villagers aren't going to come out and call at least slurs or anything like that. They don't. There's not, if there's any sort of oppression or let's just go with oppression. If there's any sort of oppression in this town, it's not tied to her sexuality. It's tied to the fact that she lives on the outskirts of town and there's a witch about and potentially a witch about and things like that. So I do like how it makes this connection of tying. I think it assumes that the viewer can, or the player can make the connection between witchcraft being tied to queer sexuality without explicitly hammering the player with slurs or angry language, I suppose. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean.
So I actually like that the sexuality is not specifically tied to the oppression that Elise feels.
I mean, we're getting into some. I mean, we were talking about this isn't politics. This is just pure bigotry and bullying. In my mind, anyway, and excuses to do it. But in terms of storytelling, in terms of games, movies, television, and that kind of thing, the phrase you hear the most often is, why are they throwing it in our face? Why, geez, they're just it's so obvious right there. And honestly, it wouldn't matter if it was obvious or not. And in this game, it sounds like her sexuality is almost incidental to her character, whereas it is her position in society, and I guess position just living outside of the village, which puts her under suspicion. So I guess that this game, is this okay, people? Like the bigots on the internet, is this okay to present lesbian sexuality? No? Okay, I guess nothing is then.
Well, on the flip side, I would say, in terms of, queer people who actually play the game, it's nice to not have to deal with triggering language and things like that. So that, I think that makes it a more queer friendly experience, actually. There's a time and place. There's definitely, there's lots of, like we said, movies and TV shows that go hard when they deal with things like homophobia and racism, and they use the heavy language.
I would term it after school special writing.
Exactly. So this avoids that, and it does it in a more elegant way that I think most people will get the connection that the game is trying to make without having it explicitly stated.
Yeah, as a storyteller, I personally, when they're like, why are they shoving it in our faces? That's a bigoted version of what is sometimes a legitimate criticism, which is, why is the writing so bad? I'm a big fan of show, don't tell. Whereas you don't need a bunch of characters to be like, she's gay, whereas she can just be gay and it will be fine. It will read. The audience will get it. You don't need to make a big deal in terms of the dialogue and the explanations of it. And that seems to be what this game does. And I appreciate that. I think that's a step forward in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and this game definitely expects that the player will get it, I think.
Yeah, it's just we get it. I think as a society, not everybody, but in terms of our media literacy, I think that a lot of people, again, not everybody, but a lot of people just get it at this point, that if there is a gay character or a trans character or a non-binary character in a game or movie or television show, we have the language to understand it. We have the media literacy to get it now. We don't need an extra layer put on top of that. Which I mean, there are arguments that can be made. That's where I'm coming from personally as a cis straight guy. So obviously opinions can change based on that. I just like show don't tell. I like the fact that Elise is gay, and not only is not a big deal made of it, it's just okay, oh, your options are women. Okay, cool. She's gay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like that again, there's a time and place for making it a big deal that a character is queer or whatever. But this game doesn't feel like it has to do that. It's just it doesn't present it as this I guess this big bold statement. It just expects that you're going to accept this as normal because it is.
Yeah, there's a certain level of, from what it sounds like, a certain level of trust in their audience. Whereas a lot of
it's unusual,
a lot of media, a lot of media doesn't have that. A lot of media really does make a big deal of it. Whereas here, it's just part of Elise's character. It's just part of who she is. And I like the fact that it seems like a lot of games are starting to move, and a lot of media in general is starting to move in that direction. It indicates growth in our society and in our media consumption.
But this is also this is the main character of the game. This is not, what I guess not to hit on Marvel too much, but sometimes when they have a queer character, they brag about having a queer character. Marvel and Star Wars actually, and it's like.
Wait. There are queer characters in Marvel and Star Wars?
There are, apparently. But often they're in the background, and, it's like, okay,
the gay man in the support group?
Yeah, two guys kissed for 2 seconds on screen. We don't know their names or anything, but but in this case, Elise is the main character, and the main supporting casts are her potential love interests. So, and that's, this game is fine. Little Goody Two Shoes is fine with putting that front and center.
I don't know what you're talking about, Abe. They have names. They're Gay Men Extra Number 1 and Gay Men Extra Number 2. They're right there in the credits.
Yeah.
Representation. Ugh. Well, I really like that. I really like that. It's just here, and it's part of the game in a way that is not, attention isn't called to it in dialogue, or it's just there. And we're gonna move on to the next game now, because this episode's gonna be running a little long, but I think that's okay. It's our holiday episode. I wanted to move on to the other game we're going to be talking about today. Izzy played this. It's called In Stars and Time, and this is another indie RPG. Which the last game, Little Goody Two Shoes, was obviously inspired by classic RPG Maker style horror games, and this game, In Stars and Time, actually was made in RPG Maker MV. MV is 1005 in Roman numerals. There have been a lot of RPG Maker entries. I don't think they're to 1005 yet. I'm not sure why they called it MV Megavolt. But anyway, so this was developed in this, and honest gun to my head, if you told me that this was developed in RPG Maker, I would not believe you. It is such a unique and fascinating art style. Very, very eye-catching. And moreover, this game also has some strong queer representation in it, in a way that, again, attention isn't called to it in a very artificial way. It is very, from what I've read, Izzy, it's very well integrated into the story in a way that this is just who these people are.
Oh yeah, definitely. So it's interesting because at first you might, especially bigots are going to say, oh, this is in my face because there's pronouns in their profiles in the menu or whatever.
I mean, what else are they supposed to say? They only have so many talking points.
Right. But it's, so in your party, there is 2 asexual people, one of who is also aromantic. There's 2 non-binary people, and there's a trans person. But all of that is more worked into how they're referred to with pronouns and how they react to things and events that happen in the story, versus really being called out very often, if ever. There's a very good conversation between the 2 asexual party members at some point in the game where they just discuss the fact that they live in a very accepting world with a very accepting religion overall. It's a religion of change. So being trans or being non-binary things, it's just it's all accepted very well. But one way in which they're not as good is that they do expect people kind of to pair up and bond eventually. So there's a very good conversation between these 2 asexual characters at one point where they discuss this, and the aromantic characters kind of comes to the realization that changing doesn't have to mean changing who you are. It can also be changing the system or people's perceptions of things, things like that. So it's never a story of queer pain. It's always a story of queer acceptance and these people just being happy to be who they are.
Mm.
That not that there isn't other kinds of pain in this game, because there's a lot of that, but
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yes, it sounds like there's an awful lot of pain in both the storyline and in terms of some of the gameplay.
Yeah, so it's a time loop game.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that comes with a time loop game is involved there, in the fact that you will be doing some of the same things over and over, which is not always a bad thing. And depending on how, I mean, roguelike is one of the biggest indie genres right now and is infiltrating like all the AAA games as well. So, but there is a degree of repetitiveness to that, and the kind of small scale of this project and how the small scale of the story does lend to a higher level of repetition than might be the case otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And that can get frustrating, but in a way it's also like part of the point because you're playing a character who is getting incredibly frustrated at having to redo things over and over. And so sometimes if the game purposely frustrates you, I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be too much for some people, or can be too much at points. So there is that to consider.
Yeah, so we're at the we're Bill Murray at the 3/4 point of Groundhog Day, sort of.
Yeah.
In terms of the frustration. Well, just talking about the game itself and looking at the screenshots and stuff like that. It's an indie RPG, and obviously there's a lot of Undertale here, and by association, Earthbound.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who is still struggling to beat Earthbound, we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. How do you think I would respond to the game? It's like it is very much in the Undertale style, but it seems like it subverts a lot of that.
Right. So it depends on what about Earthbound or Undertale would be off-putting to someone, because they're, despite having a similar vibe in a lot of ways, it's very much its own game with its own gameplay and its own ideas. So, and its own themes. Like the main theme of the game is change, but it's not as straightforward as that might appear just saying it. And I might be one of the most thematically cohesive games I've ever played. Like everything feeds into its themes and calls back to them and reminds you of what it's about in a way that is very organic and just very impressive.
Well, I find the juxtaposition of this is a society and characters who literally celebrate change. That's their religion, in a sense, is change. Change is good. Change is necessary. And that's juxtaposed with the narrative concept of a time loop, which is inherently static, and change can't happen in a time loop. So I feel like the juxtaposition of the two and the characters' struggle to change while stuck in that time loop is really interesting.
Right. It's all purposefully done and very well placed and well explored within the game. There's like, your character is changing constantly. It's the character you control, Sifrin, while everyone else is staying the same, except they are changing in the fact that how you talk to them and how you have changed also changes how they might react to situations or how things will occur. So it's kind of a back and forth where, and like including your character coming to these like, oh, I never knew this about this person before, and I feel so much better about my relationship with them now, and then getting juxtaposed by the fact that, oh, next time they don't remember that we had that conversation and I have to like say it again, but now it feels fake because I know already. It's very continuously impressive to me how much the narrative is fed by everything that happens, and how much you feel that feeling of change despite the fact that you're in a time loop, through the point of, because you're playing through the point of view of Sifrin, who the game constantly refers to as you. It refers to you, Sifrin, in second person, so you are Sifrin. And that change that happens through their point of view and their lens and to their personality is a good constant reinforcement, despite the fact that you're in a time loop. And then the things that you learn and change through those time loops, and then the things that don't change, it's all kind of gels together in just a kind of magical way.
Interesting. Outside of the world and the overall story time and themes, I'm just curious, Whereas Little Goody Two Shoes was very much a hybrid of a number of different genres. This is pretty straightforward, turn-based JRPG style combat, right?
Yeah, so it's it's Earthbound or Dragon Quest. It's first person combat against wacky enemies. The main conceit of the combat being that you're basically crafting rock paper scissors magical spells, and the enemies all have an affinity for a certain type, which is actually shown in their character art. So like a character might be doing like a peace sign and you're like, oh, they're scissors. Or a character might be a giant fist and you're like, of course they're a rock, or a big rock and you're like, okay, it's a rock. But so like the art feeds into what their affinity is, and then that feeds into what attacks might be effective against them or not effective, and what characters they will be more effective against. It's not like super complex, but it gives you a bit of thinking to do, and it like is interesting to actually have to physically look at an enemy to figure out what to do, rather than just like I don't know, it's just, you don't just cast like a spell that tells you what their weaknesses are, or just see their weakness listed on the screen or something. You're like, okay, I'm gonna look at their design and figure out what to use against them. And then there's also the extra little thing where if you use 5 of the same type in a row, your team does a team attack, which is like the most ridiculous team attack in any game I've ever played, because it does massive damage, it revives any party members who are KO'd, and it heals your party by like 50%. Okay. And heals all status effects on them as well. So like, especially in boss battles, those are super key, because boss battles, they're like doing all kinds of status effects to you and knocking people out with super attacks and whatever. So then you really want to build up to that. And that also like plays into your strategy, because sometimes you'll want to use an attack that's not the same sign, and you have to think about like, how much will that delay me from doing a team attack, and will that be too long, and things like that.
Interesting. The I mean, obviously, it's built in RPG Maker, so the combat, while varied, is pretty standard JRPG style combat. Something that I really like about the RPG Maker style is just how surprisingly varied folks can make it, putting their own visual touches on it. In terms of the graphics in this game and the presentation, it uses grayscale graphics, so no color, grayscale, black, white, gray. It also uses a 4:3 aspect ratio, so you're working with something like, well, you'd see on a CRT or a Game Boy, for example, which is a nice retro element there. I'm curious, does the visual presentation is the visual presentation reflected in the game itself and in the gameplay, or is it just a visual choice?
So there's some story stuff with the visuals that I won't spoil, but there is some meaning to how things look in certain ways, and there are like occasional like brief cutscenes which are like hand drawn, basically, that are really quite pretty and like flow well with the art style that's going on. It kind of has almost this like Newgrounds vibe of like back in the early 2000s or whatever, vibe of like internet animation, but like black and white and cleaner. I don't know. It's quite enjoyable. And the fact that there's very distinct monsters and stuff for being able to visually tell what they are. It also probably helps like having very simple black and white stuff when you're doing these time loops where you have to go through this areas and have slight like in an RPG Maker game be able to do like puzzles that cross between time loops and stuff. And there's a lot of probably complexity behind the scenes of how like flags and triggers for events and dialogue and puzzles. So I think it probably helps to have a clean, simplistic art style for that, even though it's very pretty.
It is a pretty looking game, actually. I like grayscale games. Grayscale's great.
Yeah, I'm into it.
Yeah, I'm into it too. I wanted to ask you, we talked a little bit about the queer themes and the way that gender and sexuality play into the characters, but Abe and I got to talk a little bit there about how many queer themes are incorporated into media, whether they be games, television, movies, that sort of thing. I'm curious your take on that in terms of how it's presented in this game and just in general.
Okay, so yeah, I think it's an interesting point. I think I do appreciate how there is just more literacy around those things, so you can be less talky about it and more showy about it, like you were saying, and just have characters be who they are. I think to some degree that still we haven't quite reached that point with some identities, like asexuality and things are a little more on the fringe of society still and less understood by average people, I would say. So it's cool to me that like in this game, it feels like the focus of the things that do get a little more talking are the ones that are maybe a little less common to people or a little less known. So that, gives a bit of that background to people. Well, I still think this game does it very well in a way that doesn't feel like it's ever like it's not like an infomercial or trying to like, or like a documentary or something, or some like trying to explain it so much as it is just like characters explaining it to each other because they don't fully understand their own identities yet. And then in that respect, that's very true to the experience of a queer person. So
yes, and I would argue that is not actually telling rather than showing. That's an exploration within the characters themselves.
Right.
When I say show don't tell, I mean like having a random character being like, "Oh, she's gay, she has a wife," and where it's like you could just show her with her wife, like. And I also appreciate what you're saying, Izzy, that there is a certain element of, I guess, teaching that was involved in introducing queer characters to media in a more explicit way than it used to be. Whereas, frankly speaking, like the audience just wasn't knowledgeable enough about these things, and you did need to kind of treat them like idiots in a way.
And a lot of the knowledge they did have was from like bigoted programs and bigoted people. So like they didn't, or things that just were problematic on some degree. So they, what was in their head had to not only be like, they didn't have to just learn something. They also had to erase something else a bit. So,
and what's interesting about that, I find, is that because of that level of, I guess, narrative clunkiness in terms of you have to explain it to the audience, and because, it was a writer's point of view, and oftentimes that writer would have existed in, let's say, the early 2000s or late 1990s, when viewed retroactively, there is a certain level of clunkiness or something that was, I mean, this is true for pretty much any media, something that was revolutionary and controversial and a huge step forward for a group 30 years ago, when viewed by audiences today, can be interpreted in a, wow, that is real close to being offensive. Like, I don't know, pulling my top example, and a lot of people's top example, is Chasing Amy. Insanely progressive for its day, and you watch it now and you're like, "Urgh."
Yeah, no, totally. It's very true. Like, what part of media literacy is to be able to put things in the time that they came out in. So
we're really bad at it. We're really, really bad at that.
I mean,
well, we're not, but you know what I mean. As a society, we're not great at that.
I don't think media literacy is something we teach very strongly in like education and to our kids and things like that as a society. And I think maybe we are getting a little better at it in the fact that we have to. But it is something that, like, when I look back to being at school, like, you do a book report and it's on like the most basic themes of a book that's like from way forever ago, and you're kind of told, almost like guided on a path of how to talk about it versus analyzing something from both the point of view of when it came out plus modern day, and kind of, I don't know, there's a lot that can be taught about looking and thinking about media, and is not. So
I was just going to say, plus I never read those books anyway, so that I was supposed to.
Yeah, I know, but you're right, Izzy. It wouldn't it be interesting in elementary school and high school if, instead of the teacher doesn't want to teach that day, so we're going to watch one of their favorite movies, if that idea was part of the curriculum in, let's say, English class? If, I don't know, one week wouldn't it be interesting if there was a high school class that just every week you focused on a different television show from different periods? Like, imagine showing a group of high school kids around the age of 14 or 15 years old, let's say Soap from the 1970s, like that sitcom starring Billy Crystal as clearly a gay man, but not being able to say that he was gay at the time, to the point I think they gave him a girlfriend later in the series. Like, show them that. And that would be so fascinating, and would do more for their ability to analyze media than reading, I don't know, a book from the 1910s or 20s or 30s or something like that. And I'm a huge fan of it, or even Shakespeare.
Right. And I mean, I'm also a huge fan. So, but anyway.
I don't think they should stop teaching Hamlet. I'm just saying that in terms of relevance, wouldn't showing them the first season of Twin Peaks from 1990 be more relevant to being able to absorb media today?
Teach about Twin Peaks.
I think everyone should teach about Twin Peaks, but that's my own personal take. But no, I seriously think that's a fascinating idea, and it's something that will never ever happen, because I think that many, even liberals, this isn't actually a left-right issue. Many people are so firmly on the side of what we were taught in school is what our children should be taught in school.
Which is ridiculous, because we all hated school when we were in it because it wasn't teaching us what we wanted to be taught.
No, it was a spectacularly dumb talking point and concept. I agree 100%. Like, imagine if we could take what we learned from our experiences in school and apply it and improve it, instead of, like, for the love of God, I feel like to a slightly different degree, because I understand technology has changed the equation a little bit, but I have an odd feeling that if you took a student today and you sent them back to the early 2000s and you sat them in class, any class, like an English class, a math class, for the most part, they wouldn't find it particularly different in terms of the material taught. Yes, some of the ways that the material is taught would be different because technology advances. They probably wouldn't be copying down their notes from a projector, for example. But the content, those notes that they would be copying down from the projector, I bet they're the same ones that are sent out digitally nowadays.
Totally. I mean, just thinking back to like how old some of my textbooks were.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah. And the fact that they were still using overhead projectors for things even when I was in college. Like,
it's like, guys, geez, I know that money is a factor, but like, we can do a little better. We have photocopiers.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd like to move on to the discussion question, because this episode is running a little bit long, but I really, really enjoyed these talks. And yeah, like I mentioned before, I'm cis, and obviously my perspectives on these things are directly impacted by the fact I am cis, and I am examining it from the outside, regardless of how close I am to people who are queer.
And the same for me. So just be honest.
Yeah. So frankly, talking about it is how I try to get better at it. And it's nice to be able to talk about it in a way that isn't inherently combative, which a lot of talk about queer themes is, because you always have the other side yelling about something, whether or not they're throwing it in our face. So being able to talk about it in a way that, how does this matter? How does this work? Should it be done differently? That's interesting and incredibly educational to me. And I really appreciate this talk.
Yeah, constructive discussions are a very nice thing that's hard to get on the internet these days. So,
well, let's move on to the discussion question now. And like I said, it's going to be pretty quick because we're running a little long, but it's an interesting thing happened to me. This month has been my playing games that I bounced off of in the past to see if things have changed month. Because sometimes you sit down, you play a game, and it might be a really good game, and it's just not what you want to play at that point, and you just bounce off it hard. I have a few of these. So this month I decided to sit down and replay some of the games from my abandoned list, because I have all my games organized in Play Night, and the ones that I've played but haven't completed are on my abandoned list. So I got through Bendy and the Ink Machine, which is, I guess, a BioShock-like in a way. I played it a few years ago. I stopped playing because it was creeping me the fuck out. Despite the fact that I really loved the art style and the concept. And I really, really enjoyed it this time. Really enjoyed it. And then, funny enough, I started the sequel, Bendy and the Dark Revival, a few weeks later, and I bounced off it hard. I got stuck on a couple of really, I think, not great gameplay mechanics. So I bounced off that. And then a few days ago, I decided to try to play The Witness again, which I bounced off hard a few years ago. I got further into it this time. Eventually, I just found that there were some frustrating points in it. I thought some of the puzzles, you have to search the world for teaching puzzles. I found that sometimes it wasn't really there. And the lack of an overall story, and just to be honest, the pretentiousness of it, really, I found it very difficult to get engaged. Then I downloaded its parody game, The Looker. I beat it in 2 hours, and I think it's a much better game than The Witness. It might be the best parody game I've ever played. And I just recently, again, this will be the 4th time I've restarted Earthbound. I got 3/4 of the way through the game this year. I stopped, I stalled, and now I'm just like, screw it. I'm going to beat it. I'm going to beat this damn thing. I'm going to get it off my backlog. So, Izzy and Abe, I'm curious, what are some games that you may have bounced off of in the past, but you revisited later and turns out you really enjoyed them? They might turn into your favorite game, or at the very least, a fun experience.
For me, ironically, it's Earthbound. Of course, this, my first time playing that was when I was 11. So, and I went through the whole loop of playing it, getting angry, and turning it off, and then going back to it. When I first played it. But I think it was about when I got to that swamp level, where you gotta go through the swamp, and like it's like you had to walk underwater, and like if you're underwater for so long, you get a cold or something. I think that was extremely frustrating for me playing my first RPG at 11 years old, and but
eventually I've gotten to this point yet. I'm worried.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, it was easier when I tried to play it again as an adult. So, but yeah, that was one I definitely bounced off of at the beginning. But then I guess the other one would be like the Persona games, mainly because when I booted up Persona 3 for the first time, I was like, okay, you're going to class, and then you're going and doing the fighting thing, and it was like, oh, I got to do this for like 100 hours. I don't have time for that.
Go to class. This is what I do already.
Yeah, really. But yeah, when I eventually picked up Persona 4, and once I found more time, like it was like, yeah, okay, this is a great game. These are great stories. So.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate what you're saying about. I think Neil also bounced off Persona hard, and now I think it's one of Neil's favorite game series. Yeah, Earthbound. I just got Pooh. Pooh sucks.
Oh.
He's terrible.
Yeah.
He's terrible.
He never learns magic. Yeah, it makes it tough.
Yeah, level scaling is something that when it was invented was a great idea to get, like, when party members join, they're at the same level you are, so you're not like, why is this person at level 14? I'm at level 50.
He learns magic. It just says he can't use weapons. It's just that it takes him a long time to learn the magic that's actually useful.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating.
I would say one of the annoying parts of Earthbound, is just that your party members always join you at a much lower level than you.
And then there's a game of catch-up. Izzy, what is yours? Or multiple ones?
I have quite a few, because I basically, when I left home and went to college, I kind of made this conscious decision that I was going to try and go back and beat a lot of those games and then I've kind of taken that forward, as well as trying, like, I tend to try and go back to games. But there's a few that come to mind. The Dragon Quest series as a whole. We had Dragon Warrior on NES when I was a kid, and I did play it some and thought it was kind of cool, but we also had Final Fantasy 1, and as a kid that was just much more exciting to me. And then I played Dragon Quest 8 when it came out with my mom, which was fun, but we never actually beat it. And then it wasn't until they did those remakes of 4, 5, and 6 on DS that I really started to get into the series and appreciate it for what it is a lot more. It's still not like my favorite series of all time, but there's some really good games in it, and it's just a really fun thing to just relax to. Dragon Quest.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Bloodborne is one, because I've never really been able to get into the Souls games. So I basically bounced off Bloodborne because I was like, it's just another Souls game. But then when I went back and replayed it, there's just something about it that clicks more for me. I think it's partially just that the game encourages you to be aggressive a lot more than other Souls games do. The setting's also just really cool. So I really got into Bloodborne, and now it's probably one of my favorite games. So that's one of them. One that's like closer to my heart, because Breath of Fire is one of my favorite series of all time, and one of my first series I played is Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter, which when it came out on PS2, I was one of those people, like many fans of Breath of Fire, that was like, this is just not the same. I can't do it. It's too different. And then when I eventually went back and properly beat it multiple times, I now like have a hard time deciding if I like what my favorite game in the series is, and it's up there as one of my choices. Like, it's such a fascinating, well-designed, just different game that I absolutely love. Final Fantasy 13.
Okay, yeah.
I obviously, like many
Again, good
people,
company there.
like many people on launch, just was very disappointed in what I expected versus what I got, and never really played it very much. It wasn't until like, I don't know, I can't. Time is confusing now, but it was when I was in college.
Mhm.
I played it on Steam, which is not the best way to play it, but there is some fixes that improve it a lot. And found myself like falling in love with the characters, even when they are sometimes annoying and goofy and weird, and just like really enjoying the combat system. There's still all kinds of flaws to it, but it's definitely not my least favorite Final Fantasy, and I will definitely play it again before I'll play Final Fantasy 16 again. So there's that. Last one is Trails in the Sky.
Trails. This is a popular one. It turns out.
Yeah, I first played it when it first came out in Western release. I think that was on PSP when it first came out here.
Mhm.
And I played it for like 4 or 5 hours and just was like, this is too slow. Why am I still playing this? I can't. This is just the slowest game I've ever played. And just dropped it. And then eventually I got back to it on Steam and played through it in like a weekend, and then played through second chapter and then the third like very quickly after, and just absolutely fell in love with that world and those characters. And yeah, there's my list.
I forgot my big one until we just started talking about this, and it's one of those ones that it's so weird to me today that I completely forgot about it. I tried playing Fallout 3 when I was in college, and I got through the prologue and I just hated it. It did not connect with me at all. I didn't even get to Megaton. It was just the prologue, and it did not work for me even slightly. And then I tried it again when I was getting my master's, and oh boy, did it click. It clicked so well that I finished that and then immediately played Fallout New Vegas. So yeah, Fallout 3 might be my big one. And the one that I want to play that is on my to-do list is in my abandoned list is Prey, because it's an immersive sim. It's an immersive sim with a tremendous amount of lore set in space. And it's like, wow, this game is exactly what I love. And when I played it, I got through about, I don't know, a few hours into it, and it just didn't click with me. So I think that might have been my headspace at the time, and I need to try it again now that my headspace is better for that kind of game. Anyway, I would like to thank both of you for joining me today. I really appreciate your time coming on, especially we're recording this a little bit later than usual because Abe needed to fly back from Japan, and I didn't feel like getting a jet-lagged Abe.
Well, you still got it a little bit, but oh well.
Yeah, okay. I understand. That's a hell of a time change. So I would like to thank Izzy. Thank you for coming on. Abe, thank you for fighting off sleep and coming on to talk about your games. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Always glad to be here. Yeah.
And if you, listening, are looking for a way to support us here at RPG Fan, we've opened up a store. You can find it at www.rpgfan.com/shop. I actually don't know if you ordered something off the store, if you get it in time for the holidays. I think you should try, though, because there's some cool stuff on there, including a lot of our 25th anniversary merchandise. And our 25th anniversary is coming to a close in 21 days. That's, yikes, this year passed quick. If you'd like to support us here at Random Encounter, you can check out some of our past episodes. Last week, we actually talked about two pretty big games, Super Mario RPG Remake. Caitlin was on to talk about that. And Ben was talking about Persona 5 Tactica. So if either of those games is of interest to you, or you just like the sound of me rambling about things, please check that out. We are not the only RPG fan podcast here. We also have Retro Encounter with Mike Solosi. We recently had a two-parter on Bloodborne. And then last week, we had the first part of Dragon Age Origins, and I believe the second part should be coming out this Thursday, and that'll be the last podcast that we release before Christmas. We also have Rhythm Encounter, which is RPG Fans' music podcast. Last week, we were focused on the music of Hiroki Kikuta, the writer of a great deal of Mana music, and that's kind of appropriate with the announcement this week of Visions of Mana. I don't know whether or not they're going to be composing the music for it, but we'll see. And then next week, we're going to be having an episode focused in on farming RPGs. If you'd like to get in contact with us here at Random Encounter, you can fire us off a message at podcast@rpgfan.com. I would love to hear from you. If you have any ideas for future episode topics or discussion questions, anything you'd like to share with us about our thoughts, please fire me off a message there. You can also fire me off a message personally to jlogan@rpgfan.com. And you can also find me on Mastodon at johnologan@mastodon.social, though God knows I'm never there. Thankfully, the collapse of Twitter, I tried Mastodon and I was just like, I don't miss this kind of conversation anymore. Weird that. But that is my Mastodon account if you are curious. Abe, where can we find you online?
I stopped using Mastodon a long time ago, but now the easiest way to find me is on Instagram, Abe Kobylanski.
Cool. And Izzy, where can we find you?
You can't. I don't do social media, but you can, message
Good.
RPG fan in whatever way you want, and things can get to me.
You are a very smart person. Okay, well, if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends to help us get the word out there. And you can rate us on iTunes or your other podcast player of choice. Leave us a review. We'd love to read them. Again, Abe, Izzy, thank you so much for joining me today. And to everyone out there listening, I hope you have a very happy holidays. And whatever you're playing, have fun.